Sponsored by Bow Valley Livestock Health in Brooks, Alberta. BVLH is a beef and dairy cattle professional service provider who strives to provide high-quality animal health, production consultation, and professional cattle veterinarian solutions. For more information, go to bvlh.ca.
Our farmers wear a lot of different hats, maybe not too many forest ranger hats like we've got there, but probably a lot of these other hats are relevant to the majority of you. So as my dad will always say, jack of all trades, master of none. So I think that's just the way it goes sometimes, but I think, more and more our producers are sharpening their pencils and truly are becoming masters in multiple different areas. And if they're not, I think a lot of our producers are knowing well enough that they need to rely on a team of other people to actually help support them, whether that be some of these various consultants that you can see listed in this little wheel here to help support your operation. So here's sort of what we're going to cover over here today, and I guess we're going to dive into things here right now. So breeding plan, I think that's something that really sets the tone of what an operation is, and I think that's almost really an operations objectives and herd management. So really it's all about knowing who you are, what kind of operation what unique micro environment do you deal with. I didn't recognize any of the names of the participants, and so I presume they probably come from different areas than what we have here. And so I'll talk about some of the unique things that we even just see within our own county here, and also unique sets of economic circumstances. As we heard Eric last talking about, there might be people thinking about succession planning and passing on the farm. And so there are some various unique aspects that need to be considered about what you're doing with your farm plan. And that's going to impact even your herd health on your operation, what your breeding objectives are. You need to know what your marketing plan is going to be, who you're marketing to, who your end consumer is, and then also, unique family sets of goals too as well. So really, overall game plan is we want to increase our net income. How are we going to do that? Are we going to be doing that by increasing our income and minimizing our costs, or we're going to be reducing our costs while maintaining our current levels of income? And when it comes to cow-calf operations, reducing costs often means cutting your vet out of the program. But here I am to try to, stand a little bit on a soapbox and say, let's keep that person as a consultant on your operation, because I think we can add a lot of value as a veterinarian, but so can all of your other consultants, as you can see again by the lineup of people that we have speaking today. So measuring performance, you really can't manage what you don't measure. And so that's really what trying to echo, if anyone does take the time to look at that YouTube video, that's really what I'm trying to echo, in that video, is that really records are paramount to being able to manage your operation, because really they're needed in so many different facets, whether you need to take it to the bank to be able to get a loan, or whether you need it to just make day-to-day management decisions, or herd decisions, or genetic selection decisions, protocol decisions, you name it. We need some level of records, right? And so that starts, as simple as a tagging system, but goes on from there. And so we're going to dive into some of the, the individual things and herd level things that we can look at to help manage an operation. And the bottom there are just two examples of herd management systems. There's oodles more that are out there, but these are two that are just sort of common cow-calf ones that we deal with a little bit. So really, as I mentioned, I think our breeding objective on a cow-calf operation ends up being, in a sense, a bit of their mission statement. So I'll hopefully show you what I mean by that here. And so I think that's the reason, because it sort of outlines sort of these three questions and encompasses them. And so we'll talk about those a little bit more specifically here. So that's being your, knowing what your marketing goals are, profitability of your enterprise based off what traits you're selecting on, and what resource constraints are present in your operation. So marketing opportunities. What are you marketing? So I think a lot of our cow-calf producers in the area here, at least for the most part, that's weaned calves. I mean, typically that's done on an auction live or video or some sort of direct basis. Some of those critters are being preconditioned, so that meaning having some sort of time where they're at your operation, fed for a little bit longer, maybe given some vaccines and some other things potentially too as well. Maybe they were selling some yearlings or grasser cattle potentially, and probably a small percentage of people are retaining ownership on critters too as well, and either finishing those animals out themselves for contracting them, or maybe just retaining ownership of a portion of them and they're actually being fed out customly by someone else. And then yet again, a smaller number of you probably are doing some level of breeding males or breeding females. So that's basically your seed stock operations. So I think it's really important to know what you're doing so you can make genetic selections on that. And with that, you need to be selecting economically relevant traits. So these are traits that are actually going to increase your or rather reduce your cost of production, increase your profit. And so we're going to talk about specifically, what kind of traits those possibly could be. And you should be focusing on dealing with seed stock producers that have those same sort of values and economic relevant traits that are at the forefront of their mind. And so here's just an example of what those might be. Probably the easiest one, maybe to put that picture of what's the difference between an economically relevant trait versus an indicator trait. As an economically relevant trait is something that actually changes, your day-to-day production and costs in a sense. So just as an example, the yearling or the scrotal circumference of a bull probably isn't going to actually make you more money at the end of the day, but it is an indicator of your heifer pregnancy. So with that, bulls with larger scrotals have heifers that mature earlier and are more likely to be conceived. So that's just an example. Resource constraints, again, that can be very unique to either where you're at, whether you're from the foothills or even just within the county of Newell here. We see it, resource constraints sort of change from area to area too as well. It can be impacted by your labor. Do you have family labor that's helping you out, or you have hired labor potentially? And do you need to be making genetic selections to sort of improve on calving ease, docility, feed efficiency, depending on your availability of people? So as an example of that, if you're in an area that has lots of nutrients available and you want to really push performance and you got lots of hands on deck come calving season, maybe you're okay with having a 5 or 10% dystocia rate because you've got the people there to be able to help pull up those calves on a cold day or something too as well. Maybe similar sense, if you're a seed stock producer that's calving January, February too as well, you need to have the manpower to be able to do that. If you don't, then, thinking of making genetic selection decisions or management changes to match that, I think is appropriate. Nutrition availability and feed quality, we're going to look at those maybe a little bit more specifically here too as well. I think I would just summarize it if you've got limited nutrients available. So if we're talking the county of Newell here, out on native prairie, you should probably be looking at genetics that are of smaller frame, less productive cattle with lower milk production and maybe lower performance, but have better reproduction, right? So critters that match that environmental subset of where you're living. Similarly, within the county of Newell here, we've got a lot of irrigation, and even some people that are on tame pastures that are irrigated, they can actually have an abundant grass there that can, fit for larger frame, more productive cattle that, more pounds of saleable product at the end of the day, and they can really push those types of genetics a little bit different than the critters that are being developed on more limited range. And really knowing, what kind of forages can you actually raise on your operation? Are you buying them in? What's really available? Are you using, stored forages potentially too as well? And what are those forages? And I think it's really important to know having actual feed tests on those. And if you get a feed test on it, it's not uncommon that I have people that get feed tests and then they don't do anything with it, right? Then they, they're scrambling like, well, I tested my feed, but I don't know what to do with it from there, right? Talk to a nutritionist, talk to your veterinarian, right? Or take a cow bites course too as well, right? There's a lot of simple things that you can do just to be able to, figure out what forages you should be feeding to your replacement heifers versus your cows versus your second calvers versus your bulls. And what times of years, what stage of pregnancy should you be actually feeding those? And if you're purchasing in feeds, try to do that on a least cost basis, and figure out on a dollars per nutrient, as to what that cost is. So, if you're getting in distiller's grains for crude protein to bump up protein availability on some stored grass that you're trying to graze, figure out what that cost is on a crude protein percent basis, right? And compare that to other feedstuffs that might be available to you. So in talking about nutrition, I can't go without talking a little bit about epigenetics. And so what epigenetics is really, it's quite a unique sort of, not really theory, it's actually a unique science actually in a sense, and it can be played out even in humans. And I think even through our COVID stress that we're seeing by some people, there'll be definitely some stresses and like things of the nature that will come play even in humans. But when it comes down to cattle, it's really any nutritional health or environmental impacts to the cow while the calf is in the womb that's going to impact the lifetime performance of those calves. So here's just an example of two calves. Let's presume they had exactly the same genetics, but the one calf on our right had some sort of stress happen to it. So the cow is maybe deprived of crude protein. Maybe she got sick, got bad foot rot or something during gestation. And these critters, these calves that are in utero have the exact same genetics, but because of those stresses, that actually changes how those genetics are going to be expressed. We're not going to go into the specifics of how that works, but it's basically by some level of methylation so that only some genes are turned on or turned off in effect. And so you might get calves that will actually perform differently just because of what their nutrition was during gestation or whether they got sick during gestation too as well. So really what epigenetics is in summary here too, again, is just it's enabling the expression of those genetics by making sure you're meeting nutrition, minimizing stress, maximizing health, and meeting all the nutritional requirements throughout all of gestation. And then also there's a bit of an epigenetic effect just within the first about 60 days or 6 weeks on a beef calf too as well. And so it's making sure you're meeting the nutritional needs of that calf in early life too as well to make sure that those genes are turned on and expressed to the best of their ability. And we know that that this can impact, not just, it doesn't just turn cows into that crappy looking little Hereford over there. It can actually change, how the placenta grows, how lungs develop, and impact actual, BRD rates, change actual reproductive success rates, change, marbling, change how much lean meat yield is actually being laid down just because of impacts to that fetus in utero. So back to nutrition sort of overall and genetics, I guess, really overall in the context of a cow-calf herd, things to be, people always want to select the biggest and best heifers, out of your pen. But I would caution you in a sense that, the larger the frame, the larger mature size, the larger the maintenance cost. And if you're in an environment that doesn't allow for that to really make do, you really have to be careful because by selecting for high performance critters and you're out on native prairie, those cows are going to start to get to be really large frame cows. And if they don't have the right resources, aka the right amount of grass to actually get those cows to meet that performance level, they're just not going to perform, and they're going to be lower body condition score cows that they might be able to barely pull out a calf that is pretty big and meet what their genetics are, but eventually something's going to suffer, and usually that's going to be body condition and then eventually fertility on that cow too as well. So that's sort of a classic cow that only survives in herd for 3-4 years, and then she comes up dry or late or open, whatever it may be. So just to drill down on one specific trait that I think people can focus on, because milk equals pounds a calf in a sense, I think there's obviously a point of going too far also with a milk EPD on a critter. And so there's basically a theory here of optimum milk, right? So depending on what your grass conditions are and what your forage availability is, you want to be able to target critters that are sort of at the optimum milking ability of what your sort of environment is, right? So obviously if you've got tons of forage available, you can push that milking EPD a little bit higher, right? So you've got the more groceries available to actually suffice for that lactation ability. Looking at maybe more of a feedlot perspective, you actually probably do want to increase your frame, because increasing frame equals increasing weight at harvest. It doesn't mean increased days on feed, increase feed costs in a sense, but more typically, your larger weight, larger carcass is going to be more profitable just because you got more product to sell. With considering that, you have to think, that you're not getting any carcass discounts by having monster carcasses or any reduced quality grades. So that's less marbling, I guess, by having a higher yield graded critter potentially. So this is, I guess this sort of is maybe a difficult slide for some people to swallow, in a sense that there's a lot of feeder cattle that got to that flat part of the top part of this curve here this year, just because we had to sit on our hands here just because of slaughter space for a period of time. And so the bottom line there just points out that once a pound of muscle is much more efficient than a pound of fat. And eventually, when you get in that flatter part of that growth curve there, you're putting on more fat, and that's far less efficient. And also what this slide is trying to show is that, your smaller frame critter is just going to finish out earlier, right? And so trying to make sense of knowing what types of genetics you have on your operation is going to be important in terms of being able to sort those critters into the appropriate groups if you're feeding them to the the right finishing either frame or size so that you're being more efficient with your operation. So match your genetics to your environment, right? So here's classic nurse cow that's out on prairie and someone wonders why she comes up dry. Well, you probably shouldn't have a Holstein out with the rest of your beef herd, but that's a whole other story altogether. But really, as you can imagine, as we were talking about lactation ability and milk EPDs, that milk EPD for that Holstein cow is way too high for what native prairie can offer to her, right? And so she's going to, of course, run down to be a skinny cow that just doesn't have enough groceries to keep her going. And also match the bull to the cow or heifer too as well. He's got to be able to get up there and do the job. So this little Hereford guy, apparently the producer said he'd get her done, but typically you'd want to make sure their size matched a little bit better. Here's something that I see maybe that could be improved on quite a bit, and it's something that's fairly easy for me to say, maybe more difficult for people to do, but crossbreeding, right? I can easily tell you that the herd that's probably most likely to be most profitable is the one on the far right, right? This is someone that's using a three-way cross of sorts, so he's got two-way cross on the maternal side, and he's using some other terminal cross on top of it, right? So he's maximizing his heterosis effect, compared to the straight bred herd on the far left, which is a pretty common thing that I see around here. And I think that came about after people got pretty scared of large Charolais or continental breed type. And I'm not picking on Charolais, that's just what is a common one that's used out here. So any of the larger continental high performance bulls, people wanted to push for that, but then they ran into piles of C-sections and calving issues. And so I think there's a lot of people that dialed back pretty far, right, and sort of forgot about performance for a period of time. And so I think there's lots of people looking at performance now. A lot of people that are pushing and using some of those terminal crosses a little bit more. But I would push you to take it to one step further and try to get a two breed cross in there, just because there's a huge impact to that heterosis. And if you're not familiar with it, most people are. But here's sort of a basic example of using breed one that's got a weaning weight average of 500 pounds, breed two of 550. You don't just get a blend when breeding those of 525. You actually get sort of compound interest on top of this, if you will, of 546 pounds potential gain on that. And so making sure, though, that you don't end up, a lot of breeds that are doing some level of crossbreeding end up getting back to almost straight breeding in a sense if they're not paying attention of how they're crossing, because you want to make sure that you've got sort of greater than or sort of less than 75% of any one breed in there to maximize your heterosis. And so this is maybe a busy graph, but here's the end point of why heterosis makes a difference, is that it leads to, in the longevity of a critter, just about 1.5 years longer life, but also that cow weaning one more calf and 600 more pounds in its lifespan too as well. So that in itself, I think, is a huge impact. And this is old data. This is like probably now just about 15-year-old data too as well. And I think depending on how you're running your genetics, that could probably be even more yet. So actually have a program, actually have it penciled out, set out what you're actually going to do here. Because I have no idea what this person's really doing. It's just sort of a rainbow of what they're doing. So have a plan and stick to it in a sense too as well. So take home points here from so this genetic kickoff here is establish what you're marking, understand what your operation specifics and production environmental constraints are, determine what are your economically relevant traits for your operation and what you're actually marketing, and set up a breeding plan and stick to it. Bull selection. This is just sort of a quick part here because I think it's something that's really important, and I think some important nuggets. Sort of too late now because most bulls are out and going. So I guess think about this if you have a bull breakdown, I guess, right now. But I think, if I had it was easy to do a poll, I would. This is, if we're live, this is a good question I would have for people is, how many of you right here, right now, think they can tell by looking at this bull what his calving ease is, his temperament, feet and legs, udder and teat sort of genetic capability is? What do you think his calving ease is? You're going to look at this bull and think that he's actually must be terrible calving ease. It's Simmental bull. Of course he's going to be terrible, big front end on him. It can't be good. I'm going to tell you that you can't tell some of these things just by looking at the critter, right? And so the phenotypic merit can only take you so far, right? The things that you can actually tell by standing there looking at the bull are really just the temperament of that bull, a little bit on the skeletal structure of that bull, sort of the leg angles, hock angles, and sort of inside toe angles too as well. I'm a real stickler on feet and leg structure, and I think that's a really important thing to look at. Udder and teat structure. So it's only those things with check marks that you can probably tell by looking at the bull. But I can just about guarantee you that people try to infer what the calving ease of that bull is just by looking at you. And I'm here to tell you that you can't do it. There's been tons of studies done that show by measuring various different things and looking at different, tightness of shoulders, length of body, you can't tell people. And every producer tells me that they can, you can't. So where do you need to get that from? That comes down into genetics, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. I can't go without saying, I guess, the disposition is really important, and that goes back to knowing who's going to be on your operation and who's going to be handling these critters. Is it going to be your wife, your kids, elderly folk, any hired hands? And I think disposition is something that's really important too as well. So I usually mention, when we got some wild bulls about that, they're from our type of, kind of further out to the east of the county here, and they're probably or to the north of the county here, and they're big country critters that just need more space. So rough guide on our EPDs. So we're using EPDs. So beyond using visual merit, we're going to be using genetics and an expected progeny difference, or EPDs, is really where it's at. Whether you believe them or not, I think you should believe a certain portion of them. We're going to talk about the pluses and minuses here real quick. But really, it's explaining that genetic component while taking out the environmental component is really what EPDs are trying to do. And so it's getting sort of taking part of sort of group variation, if you will. And we want to make sure that we're paying attention that some EPDs are positively and negatively correlated. Yes, there are a few curve bender bulls out there, but if you go and look in a sale catalog and you see a bull that's got a super low birth weight or super low calving ease and the best, the highest, top 10 percentile weaning weight or yearling weight, it might be a little bit suspect. So you want to make sure you look at that accuracy category too as well, because as you can see, birth weight, weaning weight, yearling weight are all positively correlated, meaning that the higher the birth weight, the bigger the weaning weight, the bigger the yearling weight. The lower the birth weight, the better your calving ease is going to be, which makes sense. So just pay attention to what those correlations are. So EPDs, they're no different than any other system, garbage in, garbage out. So, if someone's submitting creeping, their top 10 bull calves and not being honest with that when they're submitting their information to the breed association, that's going to inflate, how your EPDs look. But I think within most operations, if you picked up one guy's sale catalog, you should be able to, at least within that operation, utilize those EPDs for ranking those bulls within that one herd. Make sure you're looking at accuracy if you can. Obviously, on virgin bulls, you're not going to have a lot of accuracy there unless those guys are doing some genomically enhanced EPDs, which we'll talk about in a second. So obviously, as I said, yearlings, younger cattle just aren't going to have a lot of accuracy. But if you're looking at AI critters or bulls that are in a semen catalog, if you will, they're going to have a lot higher accuracy because they've just got more progeny, more data points to be able to calculate the accuracy. You need to be cognizant, I guess, when looking at EPDs that it's more than just, you got to be cognizant that it's not just 0 as the average. And so even when you look at specific breeds, so red versus black Angus, 0 is not the average. So here is the average. These lines there on the second row there. Is the average of the EPDs black versus red Angus, and on the top is Charolais. There's the other point, is that you can't compare across breeds at all either. So you have to be focusing on pick the breed that whatever traits you're wanting to use them for. If you're focusing in on Angus because of calving ease, then look at that breed and make sure you're comparing those critters for calving ease, and you can't go and try to compare the EPDs on a Charolais for calving ease at all, just based off of their numbers. You have to look within the breed and how they rank. Make sure you're using the economically relevant traits, and if you can, use some of those traits that are actually, if you will, composite. So use calving ease direct, maternal calving ease, total maternal instability. These are traits that are pulling in multiple different genes and multiple different traits, and so it gets you away from single trait selection, because when you're single trait selecting, you kind of run into that positive negative correlation where by selecting, specifically just for birth weight, you're going to be really dramatically dropping down on your actual weaning weight in a sense too as well. So maybe focus on other traits that actually or composite traits that take into consideration multiple traits. So I can't go into all of them because every breed has their own little index of sorts. So an index is also if you will, a way to pull together multiple traits. So Simmental, as an example, has an all-purpose index, or they have a terminal index that pulls in, again, multiple traits, and some of them will even put on an economic value onto the profitability of selecting for those genetics. So circling this all back to your own records, here's an example of someone that's on the herd tracts cattle management system here. And within herd tracts, this is a commercial operation. They can actually index your own cows amongst themselves. So by inputting, just some fairly basic information, just their ID, weaning weight information, and then in the case of most of the herds that are on herd tracts, they're actually retaining ownership of some of those calves too as well, all the way out to slaughter and getting carcass information back. They can get back these three different indexes here, which is a maternal index, terminal index, and all-purpose index. And herds that are commercial herds can actually use that for selection decisions and culling decisions within their operations. So huge amount of information and power that could be used just within your own herd. So if you're skeptical of EPDs, outside of your operation from your breeders, why not just make your own index within your own operation and use that for selection? So considerations with EPDs, I would encourage, avoiding single trait selection, use index when you can, and ensure that traits are complementary to whatever your breed objectives are. And don't overemphasize live bull data, right? So I think I see that as the most common thing that people select for, as they select for, he's got a low birth weight on this critter. But did you consider that he was a twin? Did you consider that he was out of a first calf heifer? There's a lot of things that I think you need to look at when looking at live bull data, and really looking at what their genetic data is, or the EPD pulls in a lot of other data points and improves the accuracy above what that live bull data is. Maybe that critter had a lower birth weight because of some epigenetic nutritional effect during gestation. Genomic testing, so this is the genetic testing that could be done on critters to improve genetic accuracy. And so this is really a genetic tool that's done by only a few breeds here right now. And what they do is really just take a DNA sample, and that could be done on fairly young calves, actually. And that can give us a projection of basically how that critter's genetics are going to perform, as if they've got, depending on which trait, but roughly about a dozen calves on the ground. So that's huge, right? So for a yearling, that's about having, one more calf crop on the ground. So that's huge information, where normally you'd have to wait, just about a year to 2 years to find out how those calves are going to perform by the time you've made a selection to use a particular bull. And a lot of these tests also allow you the opportunity to do parentage testing, some other genetic disease testing, BVD testing, and a few other things. So I just encourage you to, if you see genomic testing as an option for the breed that you're looking at, or if you're a seed stock producer, I highly encourage you to do this, because it's just more data and improved accuracy for your producers that are going to be buying from you. And I think something that's going to be coming down in the future, maybe not available right now, but is genetic disease resistance. I think that's going to be a big part of things in the future, of trying to reduce our treatment rates, antibiotic use, and even just minimizing our times to the shoot and minimizing our handling of critters, is just by selecting for disease resistance. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of things that are commercially available for any of these traits that are out there, but these are just some of the low-hanging fruit that I think are ones that are probably going to be coming down the pipeline. Actually, in the dairy world, if there's any dairy folks out there, you'll know that there are some not fertility, but rather health traits and health selection tools out there for mastitis resistance in Holsteins. Some single traits that people can select for as potential options too as well, that can make rapid changes potentially, are these genes right here. So these are single genes, so you can make fairly rapid change with those. So those would be things to compare, would be like eye color, coat color, horned or polled. So in a few generations, really just in 1 or 2 generations, you can completely turn over your herd's genetics in a sense, because they're just single genes that are out there. They're sort of limited in terms of what the impacts are. And again, we're coming back down to sort of single gene selection, but I think it's something to consider. Most of these genes that are listed here, these 4 genes, impact a lot more with feed efficiency, with marbling, carcassability, cutting ability. So if you're into finishing your own critters or retaining your ownership of animals, I think these are gene traits that you should be testing for, be considering as options of testing. So with that, I think a seed stock producer, even a producer picking up a bull catalog, should be able to, with the information we talked about, dump a bull into one of these 6 categories here, whether he's a heifer bull, terminal bull, maybe balanced in between there, maybe he's one of those curve bender bulls, a bull that's kind of a low maintenance bull in a sense, that's got good calving ease of sorts, yet and good feed efficiency. Bulls that are high productivity, so bulls that are really pushing performance, and then bulls that are maybe more important towards carcass merit and might be important for someone that's retaining ownership into the feedlot. And other things to consider would be disease status, so knowing where those bulls come from, know what they've been vaccinated for ahead of time, as well as deworming, so that's your internal, external parasite control ahead of time, as well as knowing what's their free from status or what's their disease status. Are they free from trick? Have they been tested, BVD tested, Neonis tested? We're going to talk about disease a little bit deeper here shortly here in a second. So which breeder to go to? I think, pick breeders that are probably from, developing critters in your local environment, have similar breeding objectives. If your focus is on calving ease and lower maintenance critters that are maybe moderate on milk and moderate in performance, then pick someone that's got those same breeding objectives, and obviously of the breed of interest that you're wanting to nail down things into. And if you can, push for applying genomically enhanced EPDs to things too as well, to improve accuracy and actively get involved in disease testing too as well. Herd health and reproduction. So maybe getting back to maybe what was promised as a bit of a topic here too as well. So here's just a brief example. This is just snippets of what we walk through, particularly with new clients and our existing clients, as part of our herd health questionnaire. Just some things that we work through with them to get to know their operations a little bit better before we start making herd management decisions. And it comes back to records, right? So we need to know some information about your operation. And a lot of people that have some good records, they can just fire off what all of these points are here quite quickly. And if you can, you're shooting from the hip, I would encourage you to actually work and strive a little bit harder to be able to have actual raw data to work with, because I think having information that can fill in, whether it be the reproduction or health metrics that we're going to talk about here shortly, is really important, right? Then you're not just bluffing and telling your neighbors that you're actually doing as well as you are. You can actually make some management changes and open your eyes to some areas where there's money left on the table. So here's some metrics that I think are really important when it comes to health. What's morbidity? Who's gotten sick? Usually on a morbidity sake, you get more than 10%. That's usually my trigger to know that we got something going on here, right? We got more than 10% foot rot in a pasture. There's something serious going on here, and what's the root cause of this going on? Mortality, do we have more than 3% dead because of pneumonia or navel ill or whatever it may be? Those are really important metrics. How can we manage things a little bit different in terms of either animal flow, treatment, prevention, vaccination protocols, and who's getting affected, whether that be is it the first calf or is the second calf or is mature cows, calves of this age, weaned calves, which critters in which pasture, when they're getting affected, time of year, stage of pregnancy, time during the calving season, first part, second part, just after weaning, you name it. Has there been any recent movements, recent additions? So that's a really important question there too as well. And any recent procedures done, and also knowing, what's the nutrition, and not only what's the nutrition now, what was the nutrition before, and where's the future nutrition going, so that we can help advise on, making some decisions as to where to go with things and how it might impact not just health, but probably even fertility too as well. And what other environmental factors are maybe out there too as well. So preventative measures. So of course, being a vet, I got to be a drug pusher of sorts. So what vaccines, dewormers can we push at you? Metaphylactic antibiotics, or what metaphylactic antibiotics can we not use? I'm a big proponent of trying to avoid using antibiotics by making sure that our system is as such to not have to use them. And I think by using antibiotics in any of our points in our system, as a mass medication, that tells me that the system's broken. Our feedlot systems that have to require using Traxin, system's broken if we have to do that. It's just a crutch for the system right now. So how can we improve that to not have to use that? I don't have that answer. I'm going to be a cynic here, unfortunately. But and then also, what sort of movements, what livestock movements can prevent some of those stress? Are you moving live calves to an auction market and then they end up getting sold and moved 500 kilometers away? That's also sort of the square peg in the round hole of our system here right now that causes a lot of issues, because those are the critters that are high stress and are going to require a lot of these preventative measures like metaphylactic antibiotics just to crutch them along, right? So what are things that we can do in terms of animal movement to prevent that? Whether that be low stress weaning opportunities that might exist, or even moving critters and conditioning them to a pen sort of ahead of time, and even nutritional things that we can do slowly. Feeding calves with the cows on side to get the cows to train them how to eat at a bunk potentially. That's a huge thing that can make a big difference on how that calf is going to transition shortly after weaning here too as well. Consider preconditioning and maybe feed those critters up a little bit better, use some higher quality feeds strategically at certain times. And also preventative measures is just having defined protocols for sort of those top three, that vaccination and deworming. So that's sort of an example like I have on the bottom right. And any of these examples that you see, take them with a grain of salt, because every operation is going to be unique and they all have their own unique operational constraints or opportunities that might dictate what a protocol might look like. And set protocols for every group. That's what the bottom left picture is for, is have a protocol for your suckling calves, at birth, at branding and weaning, and all through the production stages. Have defined protocols on what you're doing. And if you don't have what they're doing, don't rely on your vet just when you call up and say, I'll use what I did last year. Have this written out. Have a set plan as to what you're doing. That echoes out into treatment protocols too as well, right? So having defined protocols, just an example of a protocol on the right there. Defined protocols not only just improve, what is being treated, because everyone's going to be making a similar diagnosis and know what they're treating. So your brother knows what he's treating, and your hired guy knows what he's treating, because you all know what sort of clinical signs advocate a particular type of pneumonia by chance, and have set protocols for different ages, stage of production, and by weight of critters, because it might dictate, how you're going to treat those critters, what the salvage slaughter opportunities might be, what withdrawal considerations we need to make, and various other animal movement things you might have to do too as well. And so just try to encourage consistent treatment. And so that protocol, if you've worked with your veterinarian closely, should also be a sequential guide of what to do when it doesn't work too as well, and what's your second treatment, what's your third treatment, when to slaughter that critter or whatever it may be. So the value of all these preventative measures, I think, can be echoed by this slide quite easily, right? So just by example, a single impact of a case of scours, 29 pounds on a weaned age critter. Of a single case of pneumonia, 64 pounds. Say that critter gets scours and pneumonia, which isn't an uncommon thing, and it's scouring calf to get run down and get pneumonia, or vice versa. 100 pounds, that's huge, right? That's huge on your bottom end. So if your veterinarian can prevent one case of scours and pneumonia by a recommendation, or even save one life, that's a huge amount of impact of just by prevention alone, and not even including in all of this, the value of that critter that's lost and the treatment costs you would have put in there too as well. And that echoes all the way out, into the feedlot operation too as well, just by those preventative factors, in that they increase treatment costs, mortality, decrease carcass weight, carcass value, and on the cow as a replacement critter into the herd too as well, decrease milk yield on those heifer replacements that have been treated before, increased first days to calving, and increased chance to be culled earlier in their life. So that's where records come to be important, right? Because that's impacting your animal selection, not only as to which critters are going to be whole animals versus which ones are going to be animals brought into a replacement herd. You're not going to know that if you don't even have a basics of a tagging system or some way of just recording who's been treated, what they've been treated with, how many times they've been treated with, to know which ones you want as your replacements. They might all look pretty good. But if they've had some sort of treatment history in the background too as well, they might have a low grade rumbling along pneumonia that might dump her off out of your herd. It might not be that she dies of pneumonia, but she might just be less likely to catch and come up open, right? And so selecting for those critters and having that record system ahead of time is going to be hugely important in making that decision. So another thing that we talk about in our herd health questionnaire is biosecurity. I think just about 80% of producers probably that I talk to think they have a closed herd. And I think if you in the last 5 years look through the list of things that I have listed there, there's no one in North America, for the most part, that I know of, unless you're a research herd, that can say that they haven't brought in animals of one sort or a type. And particularly here in the county of Newell, where we've got grazing leases galore, which is the brothel of the prairies, there's no way that there is such thing as a closed herd, right? And so disease is always a potential, and I think making sure that you have a preventative plan set for those critters, and then also knowing where those critters came from so that you can track back in terms of, say you buy in a bull and that bull 3 years down the road starts to wither away and he's got yonis. I think you want to know where the heck that bull came from so that you can trace back and figure out and tell that seed stock producer there's maybe some yonis as a consideration in your operation, and that can help you dictate maybe some preventative plans that you want to put into place on your operation. And I think that fits nicely with routine diagnostics here that probably should be done on your operation. Don't maybe necessarily need to be done every year, but some things as opportunity that I think that there exists with any operation would be fecal flotation. So that's looking for what parasite burden is out there. Maybe more important for our high moisture areas that are grazing in tighter, closer quarters than people are in the lower moisture and grazing out in more extensive pastures, but still something to know and something that you can send to your veterinarian and make sure you give them a heads up as to what your plan is so that we can sort of help you decide who to test and when to test. Yonis testing. That's a disease that is out there and affects a lot of cattle. It's incredible the number of critters that we diagnose this in every single year, right? And this is a food safety concern too, as well as a potential link to Crohn's disease, right? And so I think we want to be very cognizant of that too as well. And if you're a seed stock producer, I think you want to be cognizant of making that diagnosis on your herd and make strides towards prevention measures on your herd too as well. And that's a whole other big conversation just about managing yonis in itself. Trick and Vibrio, obviously a really important one out here just because we've got a lot of grazing pastures. BVD ear notching, even if you're vaccinating, you're not 100% preventing against BVD. And I think anyone that's bringing in replacements or in bulls should be considering BVD testing. It's cheap and it's economical, and you just got to do it once on those critters because we're trying to see whether they're persistently infected calves that are coming into your operation. And routine other diagnostics, whether it be postmortems or submitting samples to your veterinarian too as well, can be hugely important. So potentially if you've got some slippage, so some abortions that are maybe happening, make sure you grab placenta and a fetus, throw that in the freezer. And then if you get, I usually go with the rule of 3. If you get 3 within a short span of time, 3 within 3 weeks, or if you get 3 in a select age group of critters potentially, that's maybe your trigger to submit tissues and talk to your veterinarian a little bit closer. And also in terms of diagnostics, I think a lot of people have forgotten that the BSE program, I guess until the Kenny government cuts that too as well, is still alive and operational, and in Alberta pays for the veterinarian to drive out to the farm and actually do the post-mortem. And so there's a huge amount of value in that. We have a lot of producers that utilize that gets us on farm to do other procedures too as well, and gives us a lot of information about what diseases they're seeing on farm. Actually a place where we diagnose a lot of our yonis cows and some of the other conditions that we see too as well. So that's kind of moving off of off of health side of things. So hopefully you've got your questions stocked up there, because we're going to dive into reproductive success, which I think is really important. And so this is a slide that I think sort of captures what I think some people think, greater than 90% pregnant. Everyone talks about their pregnancy percentage. And I think that is pretty much a worthless number unless you qualify on that. How long is your breeding season? And what is your calving distribution? If you don't know what those are, then really it means nothing. And so reproductive success, to me, needs to be broken down on the fact if you're breeding cows, we should be talking 60 days. If you got a longer breeding season, your critters are falling off the map and you're really not managing your operation. You're not ranching in that case. You're just they're a hobby, if you will. Heifers, I think, this is a little bit maybe more open for discussion, but we have a lot of producers in this area that are going down to 21 or 30-day breeding seasons on our heifers. And that's just helping set up reproductive momentum in those groups. And I would even push that you should be trying to breed those 2 to 3 weeks before the cows. And that's just because it takes heifers about 80 to 100 days before they clean up after calving to get ready to breed again. So they just have a longer postpartum period than a cow does. And so we've got to breed them a little bit earlier than our cows. And that does sort of cover for that a little bit by just tightening up that breeding season to some degree. But again, I think it's important to move that forward a little bit more. Our calving distribution, I'll show you what that is a little bit more specific, but we should be sitting at 60 to 70% in the first cycle. Everyone tells me that they have this, but no one has the calving records to back that up. So we started to do this at preg check, and if we're preg checking early enough, what we do for our producers is that we actually stage those pregnancies and we can break down for them, this is how many you're expecting to calve in the first, second, and third cycles. Of course, we're limited. If we're preg checking too late in the season, we really can't do that. Or if that's the case, you can still be able to reproduce that from just your calving records. If you've got individual, how many critters calved on each day, we can create what that calving distribution is. Percent pregnant, I think on a cow herd, if 60-day exposure, if you're doing everything right, we should be able to get 95% pregnant. On a heifer is exposed for 45 days, we should be able to get 85% pregnant. If we're not getting those, there's some sort of slippage, whether it be bull power, maybe nutritional constraints, maybe your reproductive momentum is really flat, which you'll see here in a second, or maybe you've got truly some disease issues that are lumbering there too as well. So if you're not meeting that metric, that's a reason to sit down with your veterinarian and dive into that a little bit more. And whether that be at your preg check time or any time, really, I think is important to dive into it. So percent pregnant, greater than 90%. Here you go. These guys are greater than 90%. So at the coffee shop, everyone's doing dandy. But if we look at how they compare by cycle, you can see that herd 1 there has got 60% in the first cycle. Herd 2 has only got 40%. So how does that play out in terms of the actual overall economic performance of these two herds? You can see that herd 1, at the end of the day, when we put in a few sort of fixed values into things, ends up on a per head basis being just about $75 per head more profitable. Me telling you this right there, just to try to accomplish that, it pays for your vet bill there in itself, right? So $75 a head, that's huge, right? So that gets you into the Longhorn package probably of your new Dodge truck. So total calving distribution, here's another example of, again, everything might look nice and peachy until we go and look at that on an individual group basis. So again, into that 60% in the first cycle, and 7% open, looking peachy. But when we look at our heifers, okay, everything looks good there. We got 70% in the first cycle on heifers. But if we look at our second calvers, they're only 40% in the first and second cycle. So something's suffering there, right? So we can dive down into that a little bit more. And I think, as most of us probably know, there's probably a nutritional thing that's maybe going on there, but it could be a disease thing. But in our second calvers, there was probably something where, maybe they overwintered with the cows, got a little thin, didn't rebreed very well, and we got, some a flatter calving distribution here. And there you go, a bunch of critters that you paid a whole pile of feed into trying to develop fell off the map and became a whole bunch of open critters there, or you just got even a flatter calving distribution. So our reproductive failures, I would summarize in the cows don't calve. Don't just blame your vet. We see this as sometimes that are abortions or stillborns that happen after preg check time, right? So those are things that are concerning, and we want to dig into those a little bit more and figure out what they are. Sometimes it's really difficult to find out what that is, but they're things that we want to maybe tailor what our vaccine protocol is and figure out things a little bit more. So they're worth a conversation at the very least. Counting out how many abortions and stillborns. Here's another spot where I use a 3% rule of, if you got more than 3% abortions or stillborns, I think that's cause for concern, right? And we should be looking at, maybe there's something genetic going on there potentially in terms of a real short gestation bull, or maybe there's something going on with disease or nutrition that is really important, or maybe animal handling and movement too as well. And I'll tell you, maybe despite this year, at least from this area, ice might have contributed to a few abortions and stillborns, but usually not 3%, right? So if we're getting over 3%, it's something probably beyond cows slipping on ice. Dystocia rate, that's also just one of our reproductive failures, right? And so that comes down more typically to bull selection, can be related to nutrition to some degree too as well. Maybe not as much as what people might like to think, but just something to keep an eye out for, and goes back to what your breeding objectives are a little bit more. And poor reproductive, having a flat calving distribution, right? As I showed you, you're just leaving a lot of money on the table there. And what happens far too commonly, just going to cycle back to this too as well, is that if you got that longer exposure period, if you even have the opportunity for a fourth cycle there too as well of critters, we end up getting a year where eventually we get a bunch of critters that are pushed into that third, fourth cycle, and they end up just falling off the map, right? They don't have enough time to cycle back, or maybe grass wasn't good that year, so they don't get cycling right away. And so we end up getting pretty high percentages of open, and that's just because we weren't paying attention to what our calving distribution is. So, and the only way we can do that is by records. So momentum in my mind starts here, as we mentioned, back with epigenetics. And I think it's really important. It starts with nutrition, health of those critters, and coming back to our heifer replacement selection here is, trying to select the earlier firstborn ones, obviously not your free martins, and various other physical factors that are important, and dam factors too as well. But I don't think we're gonna dive into at this point in time. More importantly, try to meet your heifer weight targets when you're trying to raise your heifers. If you are raising replacement heifers, they only need to be at 55 to 60% of mature body weight. So first off, what is your mature body weight? I think you need to figure out what that is. And most people by eye aren't that really accurate when they're estimating weight. A lot of people think they got 1,300 pound cows, and I can just about guarantee you probably most add 200 pounds to a lot of them. There's a few people that are accurate to that too as well. And I think the only way really to know that if you don't have a scale is pay attention to what your cull cow weights are. And that can be something to get you at least in the right ballpark as to what your mature cow weight is. And that can help you figure out what that metric is for targeting your heifer growth targets too as well. And heifer development is one of the biggest costs in terms of nutrition. So I think that's really important to know what your target weight is going to be, so that you can target not just the nutrition to those critters, but also just, to figure out what feeds you want to get to them and what average daily gain targets you want. And then again, making sure they get to a reasonable mature body weight. So 85% is where we usually sit for that. So those critters have sort of the best chance at fertility later on in life and reduced risk of dystocia. And we'll usually see more dystocia issues, I would say, in thin heifers and fat heifers in a sense, but we can definitely get issues with both of those extremes. Consider reproductive tract scoring. So this is just where we're palpating heifers. A lot of people think that we're just measuring pelvises with that, but I think we're also taking a look at how well those heifers are cycling. So this is something we usually do 4 or 6 weeks before breeding, and helps us pick, which heifers we should either be keeping in the herd, or maybe which ones we should be using on an AI program. Speaking of AI programs, I think it's a pretty wise decision to consider an AI program on your heifers at the very least, definitely on cows. I think there's even some opportunity there too as well, but it really offers, a lot of opportunities of just you being able to tap into elite select sires that can improve, whatever your economically relevant traits are. Maybe you can't afford, obviously, that $35,000 bull, but you can tap into them at $20 or $25 a straw, which is quite economically, to meet your herd economically relevant traits a lot quicker. Consider synchronizing heifers, whether that be on total fixed time program or just on a heat basis. There's lots of opportunity there. I think those synchronization programs can help with inducing puberty in some of those heifers, as well as getting them just in a tighter calving group too as well, and helping set up that reproductive momentum of having the most in that first cycle from the first year. And it's also cost effective, particularly if you consider getting some owners use semen from either a friend of yours or a bull that maybe you even bought that you want to cover more ground on. So time versus estrus detection, I guess it really comes down to your costs and how you can run things. We're actually running an AI program right now where we're driving out twice a day on a heat detection program, and it actually worked out to be cheaper than cedars. on this program for us to drive out twice a day for 10 days. So just consider those options as to what's going to meet your operation. I'd say most typically, if you're going to get someone in to do the AI, I'd say our timed AI are more convenient for the AI, though. Marketing opportunities. So this is maybe hopefully bringing all these little pieces back together as to what sort of marketing opportunities I think that are opportunities that producers can look at and consider. This comes back to, again, to either our breeding objective or really what I think are your livestock objectives is knowing what you're marketing. Are you going to be marketing that live through an auction market, which in my opinion, yes, I'm a Balog, and hopefully Bob isn't listening in here right now, but I think an auction market isn't maybe the best way that you should be marketing all of your beef calves in a sense. I think there's some other opportunities for either video or ranch direct or preconditioning those calves, and even taking it to the further extreme. A lot of people that are selecting for performance traits in their operations too as well, but then they're selling weaned calves. Are they really meeting or actually reaping the benefits of that program if you're not retaining ownership and either selling those critters even on just a live commodity basis as a feedlot critter, forward contracting them, or tapping into a value grid where you actually get a few extra dollars for having a AAA versus a yield grade 1 critter. And so I think trying to entertain that or consider retaining ownership on those critters to even just get a taste of what that is like to sort of reap the rewards of your genetic selection, I think is really important. And even consider retail direct and direct to consumers. I mean, personally myself, I don't eat a lot of beef unless it's something that I've directly bought from something that I know. I was raised on the beef from the farm, and actually now all I do is buy beef from 4-H kids here where I know directly where it comes from. So I think those are really important marketing strategies too as well. So add on the adjectives. I think this is something where it comes on to your marketing program. It's sort of an open slate for you to be able to add on some various different terms here. But I think be honest about what you're marketing there too as well. If you're truly antibiotic free, be able to show that. Have the records to show that. If you're hormone free, have the records to show that. If you're grass fed, be able to prove that. Organic, whatever it may be. And if you're selling your weaned calves on video and you say you got a full herd health program, define what that is. It's not just an 8-way vaccination, right? Define what you're giving, when you're giving it, because that's huge information for the buyer, because he's going to maybe actually potentially bid a little bit more if he truly knows what that is. If you just have full herd health, it sure doesn't mean a heck of a lot to the guy that's bidding on them too as well. And consider preconditioning. And if you know where your calves are ending up, consider preconditioning. So this is dialing back to that situation where I said is trying to avoid that auction market derived calf. It has to end up traveling 300 to 500 kilometers and is going to need Drax when he gets there, right? Try to consider keeping that calf back on your operation for a period of time, reducing the stress of that critter, getting him onto some groceries and onto a good nutritional plane before he gets there, so he's a lower risk cow when he gets into the feedlot. So here's just an example of some direct consumer marketing right here in the county of Newell. I don't know if there's any county Newell people here, but I got to praise these 3 operations that were just easy ones that I could fire off that are doing some direct marketing, and I think they're killing it. These guys, I think, are ahead of the curve in a sense, and maybe not everyone is going to be able to do this, but I think considering these types of opportunity are things that are really valuable and opportunities that you should consider if it makes sense for your operation. Other ones that I think anyone could tap into, and this is sort of a national program, is the Verified Beef Plus program. So this is sort of an add-on to the old adage of the Verified Beef program, which was really just a food safety sort of program that was really geared towards just making sure you're injecting critters in the right location, making sure you're recording what you're giving, what the withdrawal times are. So that's still a huge component of this, and having records to prove that. But they've also added on animal care programs. Are you prodding critters all the time through the chute? Are you giving pain medication? Are you alleviating stress to critters when it's deemed reasonable? Do you have an environmental plan? Do you have what are you doing for environmental stewardship in terms of your land usage, water usage, riparian management, and as well as biosecurity in your operation? Who are you letting onto your operation, and when you're letting them onto your operation? Are they guided? Whatever it may be. So it's sort of a more holistic and sustainable sort of look at the operation. And how it sort of works is that you really need to be these critters that get onto the Verified Beef Plus program. need to be, first off, age-verified calves. You need to enroll with Fixus, is really just an information exchange platform so that you can transfer information from the farm level all the way to the slaughter facility. And then you, of course, need to enroll with Verified Beef Plus. And so there's three sort of other components on top of that. So really we have our cow-calf component. So that's, I think, who's the large part of the people that we're likely talking to here today. They need to be enrolled on the program. And those critters your critters need to end up in a Verified Beef Plus feedlot. So if you know where your calves are going, encourage them to be Verified Beef Plus. There's a good portion of our feedlots that are nowadays. And then encouraging that the slaughter facility is Verified Beef Plus. I think most here in Alberta are getting there or almost there too as well. And if your calf makes it all the way through the chain on the Verified Beef Plus program, there's a pool of money from various different retailers that is put in to give dollars back to you. And if you're a cow, calf, and feedlot operator, you get to double dip because you actually get dollars back as a cow, calf producer and your feedlot producer operation too as well. And I think last year I heard anywhere from $12 to $20 per head getting kicked back. That's huge, right? Again, there's paying for your old vet bill just with simple things like that, with simple record management in itself. And so all it is a lot of records that need to be documented. It's really not laborsome, and I can guarantee that 90% of the things that are required, you're already doing, right? And there's a few things that you just need to iron out and get to that point. And so that's why I put these links on here. I hope that you guys can follow these links and get to these areas and dive into this a little bit deeper. And so there's audits that are done and some documentation requirements that I can't go without mentioning. EU beef, I get a lot of comments on this program too as well. And so this is a CFIA-driven program. And so it's CFIA-driven because they have agreements with international trading partners, aka the EU, our European Union. And so they are, it's basically a program, it's hormone-free is how most people term it, but you'll see it talked as the growth enhancing product free program. So that's no implants, no MGA, no ractopamine. And so this is going to be required to have, again, a whole bunch of documentation, and it's overseen by an approved veterinarian. Not all vets are approved veterinarians, so they have to go through an approval process by the CFIA, but most of the time that's a local veterinarian in your area that can do that. And my only caveat to this program is that you're missing out on the benefits of a hormone implant that I think outweigh a lot of not using one, and so they have a lot of compound effects. So unless you're marketing your calves and getting a little bit extra dollar to overcome the benefits of what that implant is, then I think you should probably be using implants. If you're not, and you can market your calves on this EUB program and get a monetary benefit, so be it, power to you. But there's really no guarantee unless you've already ironed out where those cattle are going to try to get that benefit. Because most of the time it works out that you're still live auction, video auction. You can say that they're EU eligible. That doesn't necessarily get you more bids at the end of the day, as far as from what my personal experiences from producers. Another link there, you can bore yourself to all the links of all the meat and potatoes of that program if you want to follow that. I'd say better yet is talk to your approved veterinarian and get more information on the program from there. So take-home message sort of on an overall scope basis is that I think you really need to consider your operation as sort of multiple small enterprises. And I think what I was talking about today is really about your cow-calf and feedlot operation, but you should also be looking at how you can be successful in your stocker, your hay operation, farming operation, whatever it may be, and look at those as little mini enterprises or profit centers, just no different than in like my veterinary business that I look at my cow-calf, my feedlot, my dairy, and my small animal profit centers and how I can make those more profitable. But also create defined herd plans, establish protocols, define protocols, have a record-keeping system that allows you to follow through with those protocols too as well, and work with your support team, whether that be veterinarians, nutritionists, bankers, accountants, or lawyers too as well. And I mean, there's a umpteen million other people that are already on the docket to speak here today that can be of great value too. And make genetic, nutritional, health management decisions that meet with that plan, right? If it means have a regular meeting with your team, maybe it's just a quarterly meeting with your farm too as well. I think those are really important things to do. Sit down and look at what your records are, whether it be just internally with your own farm to say, okay, well, maybe we got to do something different this year because we had some troubles with scours here. Or sit down, better yet, with any one of the other consultants that we talked about. They can all have a sort of a lot of value there. And as you can see, for the people that are on this meeting here right now, sit down and have an electronic meeting, a Zoom meeting with your nutritionist and your banker and your and all these people too as well, right? We're all starving to give you information, and they're willing to give you this information. You just got to take those strokes of getting there and market what you do well, right? I think just figure out what it is you're doing first, have records to back that up, be able to tell your story, and get out there and tell your story and market that to the best of your ability. There's my sermon.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. That's in one session there. That's fantastic.
So that's a lot to take in, Blake. Thanks for sharing all that information. I guess one thing that, after all that information, you talked about record keeping a little bit there, and people have a very busy schedules between tending the crops and the herd and probably whatever the various family members. Why is it advantageous for them to do record keeping, and how does that save them time?
Yeah, it saves them time by giving you that opportunity to be able to, first off, manage your top and your bottom end, and in the end, it's really going to save you a lot, right? Because if you know that you can get rid of those headache cows, get rid of those calving issue cows, at the end of the day, you're not going to be dealing with those things, and you're going to have more time to dive into your family, into the rest of your operation, and actually be a manager of your operation as opposed to just an employee within your operation. And so I think having those records allows you to be able to make management decisions, right? And to be able to do that, it doesn't need to be something real fancy. It just needs to be something written down on paper, potentially too as well. But a lot of these electronic systems that are out there are super easy to use, can be shoot side or out in the pasture too as well. And really, they don't take any more time than actually administering the drug, right? And a lot of times, if they're integrated with treatment protocols, you had to look up the protocol and make sure you knew what you're given anyways, so you may as well document it there, right? But again, it just needs to be something pretty basic too as well. And if it's going to be pretty complex to interpret a lot of that information, pawn it off onto one of your other consultants to dig into that more. Again, we would be more than happy to look at records and be able to advise on those what opportunities exist.
So producers hearing your conversation today, and they say, you know what, I really want to get into record keeping. What's the first thing they should do sort of thing prior to coming to an event like yourself?
Yeah, I think you'll hear this maybe in the little video too as well. As when I came here, I chuckled at times that tagging system is also technology. So first off, having some level of a tagging system, maybe figure out what your breeding objectives are to start with, and what is your overall operation goals, and really you might not need to have everything figured out. If we send ahead what our questionnaire is, really it sort of captures sort of a lot of what that is. It sort of nails down sort of a lot of the weak spots and areas that you do have. And so I think just have some of the basics of what we talked about here today sort of at hand and ready, and we can sort of expand from there as to whether maybe paper records is all that you need for what you're trying to manage, or maybe we can take you to another level of one of these other record management systems too as well, and we can explore that just within a conversation.